The fight for the Holy Grail, an ancient relic believed to grant its beholders wishes, plunges the world into the ruin of war as masters, who are also known as magi, summon servants, who are legendary heroic spirits, kill everything and anything that stops them from getting their hands on such a powerful relic. This war went on for many years until the Holy Grail mysteriously disappeared off the face of the earth. With nothing left to fight for, the Magi who started the Battle Royale War had a ceasefire pending the time the Grail would be found again. A narrator tells the story of a man dressed in white as he's created and made to wait for his summoning by the great goddess. When the time came, the goddess appeared and fulfilled the prophecy. At that moment, a horrendous battle ensues on Earth between Magi and several mythical creatures. Each mage displays extraordinary prowess and takes down their enemies one by one. At one point, enemies summon their servants and pit them against each other to fight till the last man stands. The battle ends inconclusively as both sides get wiped out in the huge blast created by two of the most powerful servants on the battlefield. A few years after the battle, a big-tanned man with battle scars all over his face visits the Royal Magic Academy to see the head of summoning, Professor Rocco Belfaban. He asks one of the kids studying there, who happily gets him to see the professor. The big guy knocks on the professor's door and is invited in. Professor Rocco invites him in and offers him a seat. The big guy, who Rocco called Necromancer, takes his seat and listens to what the professor has to say. The professor tells him about the Battle Royale war system that the Magi used in the Third Holy Grail War. He then proceeds to explain how the foreigners plotted against them and stole the Holy Grail while in transit. Up until a few months ago, the Holy Grail was considered missing. Now it's been found by the Ygd Millennia clan, or the Black Faction, that controls Romania. One of their masters kept the Grail hidden for 6 years, and has been researching a way to grant himself eternal youth. The rather unfortunate thing about the whole matter is that the head of the Ygd Millennia clan also announced the commencement of the Fourth Great Holy Grail War. They plan to break out of the Red Faction, or the Association of Mages, and form their own independent sector. They know they aren't going to be let go that easily, so they struck first. In retaliation to the attacks, the association sent 50 elite Magi to lay waste to the pesky clan. Unfortunately for them, all but one member of the Magi army was wiped out by just one servant. Necromancer asks the professor what his role is in stopping the war. The professor tells him he has to become a master to summon his servant and work with 6 other mages so he can be strong enough to fight the enemies. At that same moment, the head of the Ygd Millennia clan, Darnik, finishes his plans to turn the odds in their favor. Necromancer agrees to help the association fight the war. However, he asks for an artifact he can use to summon his servant. Rocco gives him a precious wooden artifact and also introduces his new colleagues to him, the remaining 6 Magi that'll be fighting alongside himself in the Holy Grail War. Necromancer hears all he needs to hear and asks for some advance payment on the war. He gets his advance and takes his leave. By nightfall, Darnik plays a game of chess with his servant while discussing battle strategies with him. The servant, Avisbron, pledges his allegiance to his master and allows him to win. He reveals all their ongoing plans to create enough chimeras and pseudo-magi so the war can go in their favor. Just then, a teenage boy and overseer of things in their lair comes in and asks Avisbron and Darnik to come to see the new golems they've created. Darnik and Avisbron immediately get up and walk towards their laboratory to see their most recent creations. On the way, Avisbron tells the teenager about his dream to see his golems come to life. The boy appreciates his master's dream and wishes for it to come true. At that moment, Necromancer goes to a graveyard to summon his servant. After drawing his magic circle, he places the artifact on a stone and begins the spell to summon his servant. Simultaneously, the Magi under Darnik's control also summon their own servants to help fight in the war. Both sides finish summoning their servants at the same time. Darnik's servants introduce themselves and pledge their loyalty to their new boss. On the other hand, Necromancer gets Mordred, a strong woman who's the true heir to the throne of Arthur Pendragon. Mordred introduces herself and asks for the name of her summoner. Necromancer stares at her in disbelief. A few years ago, a blondie was dragged across the streets of a particular village after being labeled a witch. She's tied to a stake and is to be burned alive. As the people set her body on fire, she dedicates her entire soul to her lord and asks for eternal rest. Presently, the blondie, who appears to have been summoned from the underworld, is seen in her room packing her stuff to go out. When she's done, she picks up her stuff and commutes the night bus to see her master, Necromancer. At Darnik's castle in Ygd Millennia, one of the servants summoned previously, the Lousy One, asks the others to introduce themselves and make the whole palace more lively. The servants call themselves according to their specialties. There's Saber, whose real name is Siegfried, Ryder, aka Astolfo Archer, or Chiron, and the rest, all members of the Black Faction. Before the others tell their names, one of the king's guards interrupts them and forbids them from doing such a thing. Just then, the king of Ygmalenia, Vlad Tepes, delivers a formal speech of encouragement to the servants and urges them to do their best. After summoning his servant, Necromancer tells the servant Mordred his real name, which is Sisigo Kyrie. Mordred complains about his choice of location for the summon. You can't blame Sisigo though, he's the Necromancer. Necromancer teases Mordred a bit about her gender, seeing as she's supposed to be a man by history. Mordred doesn't take this well as she holds her sword to Necromancer's throat. She then tells her master her plans for the Grail if she could get her hands on it. Mordred wants to use the power of the Holy Grail to become King of England when the time is right. Necromancer has no issue with that, so he invites her to his side. Their next stop, the church. Mordred asks him why they're going there, and Necromancer tells her it's high time they confess their sins to the priest. Just outside Darnik's castle, one of Darnik's master mages, after summoning his servant, names her Berserker and tests out her powers on a golem he prepared for her. Berserker uses her powers to destroy the golem in one strike. Inside the castle, another one of the master magi, Fiore Ygmalenia, has a discussion with her own servant. As opposed to the centurion she expected him to be, her servant Archer actually appears to be a human being for good reason, though he plans to keep his identity secret. They talk about a few things concerning the Holy Grail War before the scene cuts to the next. In the next scene, another one of Darnik's masters, a female pervert, licks her servant Astolfo's body in her lair. When Astolfo gets tired of all the licking, she gets up and leaves to explore the town. The fourth master, the weird man who interrupted them earlier on, Gordes Music Ygmalenia, summons his own servant Saber and asks after his ambitions. To his surprise, Saber tells him he has no intentions of getting the Holy Grail for himself. This annoys Gordes and he dismisses him. Elsewhere, the king and Darnik talk about some of the historic people they summoned to be servants to their cause. Now all that's remaining is the assassin who plagued the lands of England, Jack the Ripper. Darnik tells him to keep calm for a while, that the assassin would be there with them soon. Necromancer and his servant arrive at the church to meet the priest, Master Shiro Kotomine. After the necessary introductions, their servants show themselves. Mordred senses some tension in the air and summons her sword to fight the two people in front of her. To avoid conflict, Necromancer orders her to keep it sheathed. The two masters settle down to discuss their common enemy. It's revealed that Darnik and the king had plans to summon the most dangerous servant ever known, Vlad III, a dangerous vampire. Shiro tells Necromancer to follow him to check out the other masters. However, Necromancer isn't a team player, so he politely declines the request and leaves. On his way back, Mordred asks Necromancer why he didn't want to work with Shiro. Necromancer tells them there's something about them that's not right. Mordred appreciates her master's independence as they continue on their journey. Back at the church, Shiro tells his servant to keep hold of her horses and work with the other masters. They can leave acquiring the Holy Grail for another day. While they discuss, another master waltzes into the church and complains about his servant, Spartacus, aka Berserker of the Red, who left him to search for things to hunt. Deep in the forest, the master's Berserker, Spartacus, interrupts a hunter just as he's about to get his kill. The hunter is left dumbstruck, as the mere size of Spartacus makes him pee his pants. Fast forward to a few hours into nightfall, Necromancer and his servant walk through enemy territory to look for a fight. Some small fry comes by to stop them. Mordred tests her powers on the powerless enemies and finishes them all in an instant. Necromancer also steps in and helps her out. After the fight, Necromancer commends Mordred for her strong fighting skills. They keep pressing on further into enemy territory. Shiro gets to a very dark place and summons Karna, the Lancer servant and son of the sun god Surya, to help him eliminate the supreme ruler in time before she interferes in their personal business. He probably has his own secret plans to seize control of the Grail after the Holy Grail War. Astolfo endures another licking session with her master and waits for her to finish. When she's done, she heaves a sigh of relief and leaves the lair. In the laboratory, one of the humanoid experiments, the homunculi, jolts awake from his hibernation in his breeding tank. So the homunculi are genetically modified humans created for the sole aim of supplying magic to the servants on the battlefield. However, this particular homunculi had seen the horrible things the humans did to his fellow homunculi, so he wiggles his way out of his breeding tank and escapes. He forces his weakened body to move around the corridors of the castle until Astolfo finds him. She feels pity for the poor homunculi and decides to help hide him from his enemies. Soon, Castor, Darnik's servant, and the teenage boy notices the empty homunculus tank and wonder where the homunculus could have gone to. Astolfo takes the escaped homunculus to her room and asks Archer for help. Archer tells her that the boy has a weakened body and may not last longer than 3 years. Still, Astolfo refuses to back down from helping him. Elsewhere, Shiro has a meeting with his minions to inform them that he's sent Karna to fight and eliminate the ruler who arrived a few hours ago. At that same moment, Karna boycotts Jeanne d'Arc, the blondie from earlier, on the road to her destination and challenges her to a duel. Just as he's about to attack her, Gords and his servant, Saber of the Black, arrive to help the ruler out. Gords acts impulsive as always and keeps trying to win ruler's heart. He's always had the urge to prove himself to people who didn't really care about his powers. So Saber and Karna introduce each other and launch themselves at each other to begin the fight. A little insight is shed on Saber's old life. Apparently, he used to be a hero who would grant the wishes of the commoners. In his past life, he's always been a tool to grant people's wishes. At one point, with humans being humans, his own country wished him dead, and he had to obey their wishes. Saber died in his past life without even knowing his own purpose and direction. He charges Karna with all his might and fights him. Meanwhile, Gortys loses it and keeps trying to ask for help from the ruler. However, the ruler refuses to interfere in the fight. When the sun begins to rise, Karna retreats from the fight for fear of Gortys losing his powers due to the sunlight. Saber appreciates his thoughts and lets him go. Gortys asks the ruler to follow them to the castle to meet Darnik. However, she refuses to do so and chooses to head to Trefus first. The homunculi boy has a nightmare and wakes up to see Astolfo near him. Archer also materializes and introduces himself as Chiron alongside Ryder, who is Astolfo. Chiron spares no time in letting the homunculi know that he has just 3 more years to live on Earth. The homunculi is devastated as he realizes he doesn't have enough time to leave his footprint. Archer and Astolfo leave him shortly to reflect on things. Right outside the castle, in the yard, the berserker of Black Frankenstein meets with her master, who narrates her history. Apparently, Frankenstein is a monster created from body parts. In her past life, she's always begged her master to give her a partner, but he refused. So she ended her life in self-immolation, only to be reborn years later. After hearing her own story, Frankenstein asks her master about what he wants for the war. Her master tells him he wishes to protect his sister. Frankenstein gives him a flower. Fiore and her servant, Archer, talk about their plans with the Holy Grail. Archer says he wishes to get immortality again, and Fiore only wishes to stand on her 2 feet. Necromancer and his servant Mordred are seen in a building situated at the graveyard arguing about going outside. While they discuss, they receive a magical message from Shiro informing them that Berserker Spartacus is on a rampage toward Darnik's castle. As he approaches Darnik's castle, Berserker faces some of the golems placed outside the castle and has some fun pummeling them to the ground. Not so far away, 2 servants, who are enemies to Darnik, Achilles, the rider of the Red faction, and his sister Atlanta, the archer of the Red faction, watch Berserker of Red closely and discuss how to stop him. Atlanta complains to her colleague, telling him that she still hasn't met her master after being summoned for days. Achilles tells her it's their nature to stay hidden, so she shouldn't blame them. While they talk, someone else joins the fight. At the entrance to Darnik's castle, Darnik, the king, and some of their servants and master all assemble to take care of the Berserker problem a few meters ahead. Meanwhile, the homunculi Astolfo rescued struggles to stand and walk. Astolfo challenges Spartacus first and manages to slice off one of his legs. Berserker charges at her and gets pinned down to the ground. Soon, the king and the others join and put an end to the Berserker of Red. When they're done, they get ready to take their leave. Castor, however, senses the 2 other servants lurking in the trees. He leaves the rest to the other servants. In the meantime, Astolfo rushes back to the castle now that there's a distraction so she can sneak the homunculi out of the castle. Saber and Berserker of Blackface Achilles. Achilles enjoys himself as he spars with the 2 servants in front of him. He gets to test out their strengths and limits before calling his sister into the fight, who shoots an arrow at Saber. With her partner now out of commission, Berserker unleashes her magic and prepares herself to fight Achilles. Gortys, who's watching his servant fight, gets so disappointed at Saber that he forces him to use a forbidden power just to take down 2 enemies. Thankfully, Castor, Darnik's servant, arrived in time to stop him from breaking the rules. Gortys dispels Saber and leaves only Berserker to face the 2 adversaries. Luckily for her, the archer from Darnik's side already has his sights set on the hero. He helps her clear out Atlanta's arrows as she charges towards Achilles. Achilles knows it's a losing game for him, so he summons his horses and retreats in the meantime. Astolfo takes the homunculi through a not-so-secret part of the castle and exposes herself to everybody. At that moment, Castor announces Ryder's betrayal of Yggmalenia. She's taken the escaped homunculi and is now on her way to the woods with the boy. Stop her from escaping with the boy by all means necessary. After running a few meters, Homunculi stops and asks Astolfo what the point of rescuing him is, since he only has about 3 years to live. Astolfo tells him to live the rest of his short life freely and without worry. Just then, some golems materialize themselves from the ground to fight Ryder, the traitor. Saber and Gortys also join the fight shortly to stop them. Astolfo holds Saber off and orders Homunculi to run as fast as he could. However, impulsive Gortys catches up to him and throws him off balance. Just as he's about to capture him, the homunculi boy develops the will to live. He activates his magic powers and attacks Gortys. Gordes deflects the blow and punches him to the ground. Ryder, while pinned to a tree, talks some sense into Saber's mind and asks him to help the little boy live a life he can be proud of. Saber changes his mind and confronts his master, Gordes. He gives Gordes the chance to switch sides and help the homunculus. However, Gordes opens his mouth and spouts some more nonsense that annoys Saber. At that moment, the ruler's servant arrives to intervene in the matter. Saber apologizes for harming the boy, and then proceeds to do something unimaginable. He reaches into his chest, removes his heart, and gifts it to the homunculus boy. The ruler is shocked to death to see such kindness from a servant. With little time left in his second life, Saber asks the ruler to make sure that boy lives the full life he deserves. As he disappears into nothingness, Saber thanks everyone for helping him find his way again. The homunculi boy suddenly jolts back to life as his new heart begins to function. The ruler, Jeanne d'Arc, swears to protect the boy from any harm that may come his way. Before waking up, the homunculus boy dreams about meeting a dragon who gives him the mark of a new master in his hand. Just then, he wakes up to see Jeanne d'Arc and Astolfo near him. Astolfo is so glad to see the boy while Jeanne checks for the functionality of the new heart. Once she confirms it's working fine, she tells the boy everything, from Saber sacrificing himself to give him a heart to him being there. Moments later, the king, Darnik, and a few others finally catch up to them. Astolfo faces her comrades to defend the boy. At that time, Gordes wakes up and apologizes for his incompetence. The king orders the homunculi boy to surrender himself back to their possession so they can continue conducting experiments on him. However, Jeanne d'Arc steps in and introduces herself as the ruler summoned to supervise the Holy Grail War. She tells the king and his men that the boy is now in her possession, and she refuses to hand him over to them. The king tries negotiating with her, but she stands her ground and holds up her part of the deal with Saber. Eventually, the king backs off and questions Ryder's options. He asks her if she considers what she did as treason to the nation. However, Astolfo tells him she did the right thing, so she has no regrets. The king orders Castor to capture Astolfo and asks the ruler to join his side. Jeanne tells him she chooses to stay neutral throughout the war. The king and his people begin moving back to the castle with a bound Ryder. Before she goes, Astolfo asks the boy to live a fulfilling life now that he has a second chance. Once the king is gone, Jeanne takes the boy somewhere else. On the other side of the world, Shiro and his secret squad hear the news of Spartacus's capture. They conclude that the berserker's unusual rebellion against his master must have been caused by something his master did. They end the meeting abruptly, on an inconclusive note. Elsewhere, Ryder's master punishes her for betraying their clan and caring more about a homunculus than her. She binds Astolfo in a dungeon and leaves her there to reflect on her actions. When she's gone, Archer appears to Astolfo, who is worried about the boy's new life. Archer assures her that the boy is in safe hands. The ruler is not just anybody. After trekking the woods for a few miles, Ruler and the boy stop to talk a bit before continuing their way. Homunculus boy shows Ruler the sword Astolfo gave him and asks her what he should do with it. The ruler tells him it's his to keep since it was a gift from the person who saved him. With a vague and depressing look on his face, the boy keeps on moving. Jeanne, however, feels uneasy as she keeps seeing an unsightly vision of the boy. She starts off by introducing themselves. She tells the boy to give himself a name. He chooses Siegfried, which is the name of the saber hero who sacrificed his heart to save him. Jeanne appreciates the name and tells him her name. Then she decides to teach him how to live. First things first, she gives Sieg some food and teaches him how to eat. Back at the Ygmalenia castle, Darnik and his king discuss what to do about the traitor, Ryder. The king decides to let her go this time. They don't have time to focus on the wrong things. Their main worry is the assassin, Jack the Ripper, who appears to have killed her master. At that time, a message comes in for them and they check it out. In some parts of the Ygmalenia land, Jack the Ripper and her new master, which is a lady she calls Mom, comfort each other as they prepare to get some rest for the next big day. Ruler and her traveler make another stop over at the edge of a cliff. Sieg asks Jeanne why she felt hungry, seeing as servants, whose spirits never feed on food. Jeanne tells him she's not exactly a servant as she's just borrowing another person's body to live in while she carries out her mission. She also mentions that she was summoned the wrong way, and this could mean something is very, very wrong with the Holy Grail War that's about to start. Sieg tells her the breaking out of his casing could also be an anomaly that wasn't supposed to happen. However, Jeanne tells him to live as much as he can since he's been given the chance. Sieg sighs and continues the journey. In the meantime, impulsive Gordes keeps drinking and throwing tantrums over his own failure with his servant. Berserker of Black and her master are seen talking when Fiore passes by to inform them that Jack the Ripper has been found. Jeanne takes Sieg to a barnyard and talks the farmer into letting Sieg live there with him. Once he agrees to let him live there, she meets up with Sieg to say her goodbyes. Before she goes, Sieg asks if he would ever see the ruler again. Jean tells him he would see her again. However, what she didn't tell him is that they may meet on the battlefield. A little insight is shown into Mordred's first life. As one of the daughters of Arthur Pendragon, Mordred believes she's entitled to the throne of England. However, Arthur couldn't relinquish the throne to him because she lacked the qualities required of a king. Arthur Pendragon faces Mordred after taking down their enemies on the battlefield. Mordred charges at him only to get slashed down and killed. The whole hubbub with the king happened a few years ago when Mordred was still a normal commoner. One day, as Arthur returns from one of his conquests, she hides her appearance and spectates the king and his entourage. While at it, an eerie lady appears behind and tells her she has royal blood running in her veins. From then on, Mordred decides to become the king's knight and serve him all her life. Life goes on well for her until one day she's called upon to take out a traitor. When asked why he betrayed the kingdom, the traitor tells Mordred it's because the king is way too perfect. When she's done killing the dude, the eerie woman she calls Mom appears to her and reminds her to stop playing knight and let King Arthur know that she's the real heir to the throne. Mordred immediately gets to the palace and asks the king to accept her as the heir to the throne. Unfortunately for her, the king doesn't see her as his daughter. This annoys Mordred so much that she curses Arthur and promises to end him. At that moment, Necromancer wakes up and asks Mordred to stop showing him weird dreams about her past life. Mordred asks for some insight into what he means. However, Necromancer just ignores the whole matter and prepares for his day. While eating breakfast at an outdoor restaurant, Necromancer receives a call from Lord El-Malloy to talk about the serial murders being committed all around Triphas. He tells Necromancer that someone has killed all the Magi they staged in the town. Even the normal humans are beginning to get worried as the Magi all appear to have had their souls drained out of them. This can't be from the Igdmalenia clan, as they won't risk exposing the existence of mages to the humans around them. Necromancer takes up the job to investigate the crime scenes and find out the identity of the third-party killer around Triphas. In the meantime, Ryder's master takes out a few homunculi and dismembers their body out of jealousy for the attention Astolfo showed Sieg. Elsewhere, Darnik and his king discuss their battle plans over a game of chess. To avoid a fatal attack on their core, they plan to use Avonbreeze's Noble Phantasm so they can reflect the performance of their homunculi core. A Noble Phantasm is a hero's special ability they can utilize to their advantage during a fight. To do this, however, they would need a lot of magic power. This means they have to sacrifice a first-rate mage, and the best candidate they can think of is Gordus. Berserker's master steps out to lend his sister a hand briefly to fight the assassins taking out the Magi around. He promises to summon Berserker with a spell should things go sideways. Berserker nods her head in agreement and he leaves. After doing a little bit of investigating, Necromancer meets up with a bored Mordred and updates her on the results of the investigation. The autopsy of the Magi bodies revealed that after getting their souls sucked out, the assassin took their hearts to feed on and stock up on magic. Now that they're the only mages in Triphas, Necromancer and his servant Mordred kit up and wait till nightfall to face the intruder. A few hours later, the day turns dark, and Jack the Ripper prepares to strike again. Firstly, she transforms into Shiro's servant and heads over to his side to discuss with him before embarking on her mission for the night. A few minutes later, Necromancer and his servant are seen in one of the alleyways in Triphas. Suddenly, a mist of poison gas fills the air and causes Necromancer to faint. Mordred carries him to a clearer part of Triphas and waits for something to happen. Almost immediately, Jack the Ripper sneaks behind Necromancer to take him out. However, Mordred stops her and faces her. The Ripper releases another poison mist, but this time, Mordred puts on her full armor and unleashes her Red Thunder power to clear the mist. Now she can see Ripper clearly. They keep at it for a while until an arrow from Fiore's archer stops their fight. Fiore, whose legs are disabled, uses her Dr. Octavius spider legs to move around and fight off Necromancer. Mordred, however, pinpoints Archer's source and leaves Jack to face him instead. The archer prepares himself for a strike and injures Mordred when she comes. Necromancer, on the other hand, faces Fiore, who warns him about trespassing their lands. Necromancer ignores her warnings and attacks her. Fiore counters the attack and forces him into a corner. Necromancer, however, uses his battle experience to free himself and launch his own attack against Fiore. After cornering Fiore, Necromancer proceeds to fire one last shot at her to take her out. At the final moment, Fiore's brother, Callas Forvej Yigdmalenia, swoops in, stops Necromancer's attack, and corners the man himself. Necromancer asks for a fair between the mages. Since they can't give him a fair fight, he decides to fight dirty. Elsewhere, Archer, who thinks he's cornered Mordred, realizes that he's the one who's fallen into Mordred's trap. He quickly sends a telekinetic message to his master, Fiore, telling her to retreat while they still had the chance to. Fiore concurs with his decision and agrees to meet at the designated spot. Soon, the archer, his crew, and the assassin withdraw from the fight. Necromancer meets up with Mordred and breaks into a car so they can use it to get to Triphas. Fiore scolds her brother after landing at the agreed spot. She thinks his coming to save her was reckless and unbefitting of him as a master. Calls tries to explain his reasons to her, but she shuns him and tells him to always follow Darnik's plan. Although his showing up helped her a lot, her life is not worth losing two masters for. Shiro's servant transforms back into the Assassin of Black, Jack the Ripper, and gets back home to her master. Her master bandages her wounds and feeds her the last one of the hearts they harvested from the mages they killed earlier. Jack eats the heart and heals her wounds with magic. Now that they're out of stock, the duo plan to get back to Triphos and harvest more hearts from the mages there. The next day, Jeanne d'Arc disguises herself to be a human and goes on a search for the church around Triphos. She uses a locator spell to find the church's location and gets there. At that moment, the farmer in the barnyard where Sieg is kept feeds him some coffee after his breakfast. While sipping his morning coffee, Sieg asks the farmer about his thoughts on the word freedom. The farmer tells him, although most people think they're free, the truth is that they would always be bound by constraints restraining them from going forward in life. All they can do is to live life the best way they see fit. Still, Sieg does not understand his words. The farmer tells him to do his wish and leaves. Jeanne d'Arc walks freely into the church. Upon entering the church, captured by the traps placed at the entrance, she breaks out of the traps and immediately has a bad vision about Shiro the priest there. In the next scene, Shiro gets a nightmare about a battlefield engulfed in flames and dead bodies. He wakes up to find the assassin sitting close to him, and makes her promise never to do that again. Elsewhere, Darnik informs his king that there's been an influx of artifacts moving into the country. The king suspects that the Red faction is preparing for a war, so he advises Darnik to make sure they're prepared for an attack. Up next, Shiro summons Lancer and his master to inform them of their next battle plan. Lancer's master makes it known that he never intends to fight in the war. Instead, he'll rather just sit by and record the battle as it plays out. Shiro's servant tells them not to underestimate their prowess, as they've amassed artifacts that'll even scare the ruler herself. Just right outside their lair, Jeanne rushes to find them. At that instant, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon appear out of the ground and levitate into the air, making it a floating fortress. Shiro and his people prepare for combat as they begin their journey to Igdmalenia's castle. A few hours later, Sieg wakes up from his sleep wondering what his purpose in life may be. Jeanne follows the floating fortress as it makes its way to Darnik's kingdom. On their way there, Shiro and the other members of the Red faction release their zombie army to serve as their warriors on the ground. Darnik, the king, and the others at the castle of Igdmalenia see the danger coming, and they prepare for it. The king dishes out orders for his servants to follow, and they all get down to it. While they're at it, the king orders Archer to take command of the homunculus army. In the meantime, Astolfo would unleash her noble phantasm and show them what she's made of. The king of Igdmalenia assembles the other servants he has at his disposal and lets them loose to fight their oncoming enemies. Sieg gets out of bed quite late after figuring out his wish. He thanks the farmer for his help and prepares to leave the farm for good. The farmer gives him a belt and wishes him good luck. Just before the war between the Red faction and Igdmalenia begins, the king of the Igdmalenian clan reveals himself as the historical Lancer of Black, Vlad III. Vlad is a vampire feared by all of history and was thought to be dead in time. However, Vlad was secretly living undercover and posing as the ruler of the Igdmalenian clan. Now, a battle has made him unleash his true power to fight their strong enemy. The zombies keep charging aimlessly towards the castle. The Red faction's archer, Atlanta, fires some glowing arrows at Igdmalenia men. However, the Berserker of Black from the Darnik castle stops the arrow from completely wiping their men out. Soon, the other warriors join the battle and show their power. In the meantime, Shiro and Karna remain in the floating fortress to watch over the war from the inside. Shiro notices the ruler rushing towards the battlefield and gets worried over whether or not she'll intervene in the fight. Vlad III finally arrives at the battlefield and unleashes his power to take out the zombies. Once he's done, he faces Karna, aka Lancer of Red, and exchanges a few words with him before starting the battle. Atlanta tries to butt into the fight to stop Karna from getting pummeled. However, Vlad throws her off balance and keeps fighting. At one point in the battle, he pins Karna down and proceeds to deliver a final strike. Thankfully, Karna unleashes his hellish flames and burns himself out of Vlad's cage. Vlad commends his resilience but tells him that he'll soon run out of magic. He continues his attack on Lancer, who defends all the attacks. The battle goes on until the other mages arrive. Achilles faces Castor and his golem. He takes care of them and finishes off some of the human soldiers blocking his way. Then he calls out the heroes of Igdmalenia. Archer of the Black shoots some arrows at him from a far distance. Achilles races into the woods and finds Archer standing on a tree branch. He rushes in for an attack, only for him to get attacked at his only weak spot, his heels. Achilles is surprised that the archer knows about his weakness so much. He recalls his time with a Centurion Guardian who took care of him while his parents were gone. That same centurion told him about the only mortal part of his body, his heel. As he wonders how Archer would have known about his weak spot, Archer shoots another arrow at him. This time Achilles dodges the arrow and asks Archer why he would attack him in the first place. The archer tells him it's because he has to. If Achilles doesn't take the fight seriously, he would soon die a second death. Somewhere on the battlefield, Sieg helps some of the homunculi survivors bandage their wounds. One of the homunculi asks him why he helps them. Sieg tells her he wishes to free his kind from the slavery of the Ygmalenians. Shiro steps out to a balcony on the floating fortress and wishes to join the fight. His servant, the assassin, asks him why he would want to do that, seeing as he's a prestigious master. Shiro tells her he wishes to test whether or not their creator supports his actions. After listening to his reason, the servant grants Shiro her power. Shiro thanks her for the help and heads straight for the battlefield. Necromancer and his servant, Mordred, drive towards the battlefield like mad people so they can join in on the fun before it's too late. In the meantime, Berserker of Black finally takes down all the zombies in her area. Astolfo flies toward the floating fortress on her flying mount, hoping to infiltrate it. Shiro's servant sees her coming and sends some of their flying zombies towards the rider. Sieg, on the other hand, takes one of the homunculi he treated into the castle to free the others held captive now that the castle's defenses are lowered. Castor resurrects Spartacus, the Berserker of Red, and convinces him to fight for their cause. Berserker aimlessly rushes into the battlefield to fight. Berserker the Yellow, aka Frankenstein, faces Shiro in the woods. Darnik sheds a little light on his story and how he came to be the holder of the Greater Grail for more than half a century. According to his narration, Darnik came to the island nation of Japan to join the Holy Grail War at the time and acquire the artifact for himself. He worked with the Germans and used them to steal the Grail. When victory was within his grasp, he betrayed them and secured the Grail for himself and the Ygmalenia clan. Now that he's involved in another war for the Grail, Darnik swears to protect his precious artifact with all his life. At that moment, Shiro toys around with Frankenstein in the woods. He asks her to join his team, but Frankenstein was no traitor. The caster servant from the Red factions appears to watch and record the fight between Master Shiro and Frankenstein. Shiro gets serious with the fight and unsheathes his noble phantasm, which is a lightning sword. Frankenstein shows no surrender as she charges at Shiro with all her might. Somewhere on the battlefield and surrounded by zombies, Jeanne d'Arc senses the fight between Shiro and Frankenstein. This could only mean there's one more master on the floating island. She charges through the zombie horde and heads straight for the floating island to meet a master of the Red faction. In the meantime, Astolfo keeps taking out the flying zombies, stopping her from getting to the floating fortress. At a point, she takes out La Black Luna, her huge horn, and blows the zombies out of existence. With the pesky zombies gone, she flies towards the fortress. Vlad III and Lancer of the Red faction, Karna, continue their battle on the battleground. Spartacus interrupts their fight, but Karna leaves him to Atlanta to take care of. Atlanta tries shooting some arrows at the monster, but doesn't manage to get a good hit on it, as Spartacus keeps on regenerating. She then takes out the strongest arrow attack in her arsenal and turns Spartacus into shreds. Still, his body regenerates itself. Achilles gets cornered in his fight with Chiron. Chiron lands a ghastly blow on Achilles' stomach and tells him he knows all about his moves. Achilles smiles and attacks Chiron in a way different from the original. Chiron is surprised at the attacks, but still escapes unhurt. On getting to the castle's labs, Sieg begins freeing the trapped homunculus beings there. Astolfo finally stands face to face with the Assassin of Red and challenges her to a fight. Assassin of Red uses the power of the fortress to shoot Astolfo out of the sky. Sieg, while escorting his comrades out of the castle, sees Astolfo falling from the sky. He humbly asks his fellow homunculi to allow him to save Astolfo. Sieg gets his wish and rushes towards Astolfo. Astolfo wakes up after crash landing hard into the ground. Before she figures out her situation, Saber of Red, Mordred, and her master Necromancer finally arrive at the battlefield. They stop the car right in front of Astolfo and recognize her immediately. Necromancer gets back into the car and leaves Mordred to fight her first battle with Astolfo. Assassin of the Red faction sights the ruler rushing towards Shiro's location. She tries her best to stop her from getting too close to him and warns Shiro to leave the battlefield before it's too late. Shiro gets the memo and begins his retreat back to the fortress. Frankenstein doesn't let him go that easy as she keeps pursuing him. To get her off his back, Shiro asks his caster to stop Frankenstein from following her. Caster reads out a spell that plunges Frankenstein into mental depression as she begins to see visions of her old master and creator. For once, her master appreciates her existence. Frankenstein refuses to give in to the deceit, so she pulls herself out of the trance. Talk about a woman with balls of steel. She lets out a cry of sorrow until her master calms her down. Mordred begins her fight with Astolfo and tries to rile her up by making fun of Siegfried. the saber of the Black faction who sacrificed himself to save a boy. This works as Astolfo gets emotional and gets hit. Assassin of Red continues throwing attacks at the ruler Jean. However, Jean deflects the attacks and keeps heading towards the fortress. Shiro informs Atlanta to direct Spartacus towards their common enemy, Jean, so he can manage to stop her from getting to the fortress. Sieg gets to his savior, Astolfo, just in time before she's finished by Mordred. He takes the fight to Mordred and stops her from finishing Astolfo. Mordred leaves Astolfo and knocks Sieg down. Astolfo uses every last strength in her body to keep Mordred away from Sieg so he can escape her dangerous sword. However, Sieg stays behind and chooses to keep Astolfo from harm. Frankenstein joins moments later and prepares herself for one final, suicidal attack. Calls, her master, uses all his reserve magic to assist Frankenstein in creating her large attack. Elsewhere, Jack the Ripper finishes slashing some of the homunculus magi and prepares to harvest their hearts. Her mom calls and asks her to get back home. Just then, Jack hears the roaring sounds of magic powers clashing together as the battlefield was nearby. She ends the call and continues in the opposite direction. Call's magic powers finish as he watches his servant, Frankenstein, fight Mordred. At one point in the battle, Mordred gets really pissed and activates her Red Thunder powers. Although Berserker manages to dodge most of the attack, she still manages to get her hand severed. Mordred walks over to Frankenstein's immobilized body and thrusts her sword into it. Sieg rushes towards Mordred and tries to hold her down. Mordred stares down at him from her armor and kicks him away. She asks him why he's so keen on fighting her. Sieg tells her that he'll do anything to save his savior, Astolfo, who rescued him from slavery. He then launches himself towards Mordred to make a weak thrust at her. Mordred dodges the attack and runs her sword through Sieg's heart. Astolfo lets out a cry of sorrow and charges towards Mordred to finish her off. However, pushes her away and gets ready to finish her off. Before she does so, however, Necromancer asks her to worry about Berserker as she was nowhere to be found. Mordred looks behind herself and finds out Frankenstein's no longer there. Frankenstein appears from behind and attaches herself to Mordred so she can destroy Mordred and herself in one last attack. Calls sees this and helps her out. He unleashes every last drop of his mana and helps his servant complete her suicidal blasted tree. The attack gets so large and big that even Astolfo, the Rider of Black, had to retreat a little bit. When it's all done, she walks closer to the point of the attack and finds Mordred there, standing. Turns out the attack had failed, as she only had a bit of her armor worn out. Frankenstein sacrificed herself just to damage Mordred's armor. At that moment, Sieg wakes up in a trance and experiences the real Siegfried's life in an instant. He appears before the hero and has Naruto talk about morals and why one should be a hero to the end. Sieg comes out of the discussion as a stronger human. Suddenly, he appears to be standing in front of a sword set in stone with a dragon waiting for him to pull it out. The real Siegfried nudges him to draw the sword out. Sieg uses every last bit of his strength to pull out the sword. As a result, his heart gets rejuvenated, and he's resurrected back to Earth as the real saber of the Black faction, Siegfried. Mordred cannot believe her as she wonders how the homunculus boy transformed into the saber of the Black faction. Still, she prepares herself to fight him. After exchanging some words with him, she charges at him. Back in the floating fortress, Shiro, the Red Caster, and the Assassin all wonder how the Saber of Black got revived into a weakling homunculus's body. Shiro gets frustrated a little bit and lets his people know that Siegfried isn't going to live long in that weakling's body. Still, he appreciates the homunculus boy for trying his best and waits to watch what will happen. Mordred speaks to her master, asking him to enhance her powers with his mana. Necromancer complies with her wishes and grants her some part of his power via a command spell. She launches herself towards Siegfried to attack him. Siegfried blocks her attack and creates a large attack to counter hers. Jean keeps running to the floating fortress and meets the archer of Red Faction, Atlanta, on her way there. Atlanta stalls her long enough for Spartacus to catch up to them. Then she leaves the ruler in Spartacus's hands and runs away. In the meantime, the sabers of both factions survive their first big attacks and prepare for another round. Vlad and Lancer keep throwing blow after blow until they both decide to rest and exchange words again. Lancer tries to get Vlad's mentality about this war. He seems to want to build a nation out of nothing, but his people don't seem to be that much in support of his plans. He tells Vlad some insulting words and makes sure to get a reaction out of him. Instead, Vlad uses his noble phantasm to puncture Lancer's, or Karna's body, and pin him to the ground a second time. Just when he's about to finish him off, Lancer uses O Agni, a fire spell that burns all of his constraints. Seconds later, Lancer stands back up as he prepares for a counterattack. Spartacus attracts some of the zombies to attack his body so he could get more power from the wounds they inflict on him. Jean stands there and watches this insane monster get more powerful. Even the assassin, who's watching the whole fight from the floating fortress, expresses her disgust at the hero's noble phantasm. When Spartacus is done with his transformation, he attacks Jean, who dodges every attack the best way she can. With every attack, Mordred gets even more and more annoyed as Siegfried keeps blocking her attack. At one point in the fight, Siegfried reaches his limit and falls down. Mordred rejoices as she thinks she's finally won the battle. What she didn't know is that Spartacus was rolling towards her high and fast. She braces herself for impact and slashes Spartacus in half in one swoop. Necromancer, who already knows what's coming, warns her to leave the battlefield immediately. Jean catches up to Astolfo and the homunculus boy on the ground. She scolds both of them for challenging a stronger monster than themselves to a fight. Astolfo explains their situation to her, and Jean decides to help them out. She finally unleashes her magic to protect the person she swore to protect. Her noble phantasm, which is a glowing sword, acts as a protective barrier that blocks all of Spartacus's attacks. After the first wave of the attack, Astolfo and Sieg are very glad to still be alive. Vlad continues his fight with Karna with the odds at a stalemate. At one point, Karna stops the fight and retreats to meet his master. While Vlad wonders what could have gone wrong, he receives news of some eerie event going on in the castle. So it turns out the Red faction was using their floating fortress to drill a hole in the ground deep enough to retrieve the Greater Grail. Once they find it, they begin drawing it to the ship, who's been watching over Yggd Millennia for so long, swears to save his kingdom no matter what. He, Vlad, and the remaining masters and servants they have at their disposal infiltrate the floating fortress to take it down from the inside. Karna and his own masters catch up to Vlad and his minions to stop them from getting any further. The fight begins shortly, and Karna corners the Lancer of Black, Vlad III again. This time, he gets Vlad really pissed and attacks him. Vlad's surprised as his movements seem slower and less effective. Now that he's in Red's territory, it's only normal for his power to recede a little bit. While fighting Karna, Vlad suddenly remembers what he told Darnik some weeks before the war. So Vlad has an ace up his sleeve, his noble phantasm, that he vowed never to use in his life. He makes Darnik promise to stop him if he's pushed to the end. Unfortunately, Darnik has no choice at this point, as he has to make Vlad use his noble phantasm if he's to prevent their Holy Grail from getting stolen from them. Shiro stands in front of his church and recalls the time of the past Holy Grail War. He flashes back to his first meeting with Darnik, and also the time he lost a few of his people to the war. Shiro is thankful for the outcome of the war and the power he has gained. Hao now hopes the heavens are with him in this new war. The assassin of the Red faction also keeps checking their OLED TV screen for battle updates. Somewhere within the fortress, Vlad and Lancer keep up their fight. With every attack Vlad throws, he gets weaker. He soon realizes that he's at a very big disadvantage as Lancer lets him know about the conditions of the floating fortress. Lancer even offers Vlad a chance to concede defeat and leave the fortress while he still can. However, Vlad's pride forbids him from backing out of a fight. He continues the fight and gets cornered again. Lancer powers up his lance and proceeds to finish off Vlad. However, Darnik arrives in the nick of time and tells Vlad to use his noble phantasm. Now Vlad's noble phantasm transforms him into Dracula the vampire, a form Vlad had promised never to take again. Vlad tries to stop Darnik from forcing him to use his trump card. However, Darnik was already too desperate to retrieve the Grail. He uses his magic to force Vlad into his vampire form. Amidst the transformation, Vlad tries to kill Darnik. Before he dies, Darnik transfers his consciousness into Vlad's body and takes over his body. Vlad keeps on fighting him, but Darnik eventually takes over his entire vampire body. Achilles goes first to attack him, but Darnik pins him down. Just as he's about to drink his blood, Chiron quickly interrupts them and pushes Achilles out of the vampire's way. Darnik gets up and turns 3 of the Red faction's guards into vampires. These guards, in turn, begin turning the other guards into vampires. Chiron tells Achilles that although he may be invincible, Darnik's bite could still turn him into a vampire and he's no good to them if he's in that form. Darnik goes for the bigger servants and their masters. However, they all defend themselves gracefully against his attacks. Back in the Yggd Millennia castle, Coles meets with his sister, Fiore, to talk about the state of things, now that the leaders are in battle. Gords joins them shortly and asks for an update on the war. The teenage assistant, Roche, comes in and assures them that the labs are still functional. Fiore knows they have to keep the castle intact while the others are out there fighting. Fiore tells Roche to gather golems to repair the destroyed parts of the castle. Gordes is to call their other relatives for help, and Calls is to gather surviving golems and homunculi on the battlefield. Everyone assumes their role and rushes to complete them. Jean joins the other servants on the floating fortress and calls for a temporary truce so they can work together to take down the vampire Darnik. Everyone agrees to work together as they all face the notorious vampire. Darnik shows no fear as his adversaries increase. Rather, he keeps on fighting every one of the servants. At a point in the battle, Karna, the Lancer of Red, uses his hell flames to pin the monster down. Just as he's about to take him down, Shiro and the assassin restrict the servants from doing anything to help the Black faction. Vlad seizes his chance and escapes Lancer's grasp to look for the Grail. Ruler and Chiron, Archer of the Black Faction, both chase after Darnik. They encounter some automated defenses on the way. Archer stays behind and takes out the defenses while Jean keeps chasing after Vlad. After searching through the castle for a bit, Darnik finally arrives at the church. He gets trapped at the entrance and meets his arch-nemesis Shiro. So there seems to be some history between the two, as Darnik thinks Shiro should have been killed ages ago. Shiro tells him he's very much alive and well. While he talks, Shiro takes out his holy swords and punctures Darnik little by little. Darnik's screams could be heard all across the room, as Shiro slowly burns him into ashes. At that moment, Jean arrives and witnesses everything. She is shocked to death at the sight of Shiro decimating Darnik into ashes. She asks for his true identity, and Shiro tells her that he's the first servant of the ruler faction. Jean asks him why he's fighting in the war, knowing full well it's against the rules. Shiro tells her that he's only working towards saving mankind from total ruin. After all the hubbub dies down, Astolfo throws a tantrum at Sieg for putting himself in danger and saving her. Sieg tells her he just couldn't sit and watch his kind get decimated by their enemies. He promises to keep fighting until his people are liberated and safe. Astolfo respects his conviction and praises him for being such a cool guy. She also pledges her loyalty to him and offers to help when the time comes. While Astolfo talks, her master, the lunatic lady who licks her all the time, arrives at the battlefield to do something bad. Meanwhile, Jean keeps on questioning Shiro's intentions on the floating fortress. She wishes to know the end game. Shiro tells her he strives only to save humanity from themselves. Jean tells her that as a ruler, he shouldn't interfere with the humans. Doing that would be against the rules and may attract punishment from the creator himself. Shiro tells her to go to hell with all her accusations. He's tired of humans making the same flimsy mistakes over and over again. He's going to do something about it, and that's final. Jean asks him what he did to the Masters of Red. Shiro tells her he put an end to them now that they've served their purpose. At that moment, Semiramis, aka the Assassin of Red, joins the conversation. Soon, the servants of the Red faction arrive at the church to see what's going on. Shiro informs the servants that he got their masters to surrender their command spells to him, so he can take control of their servants. On hearing this, Achilles tries to attack Shiro, but Karna, the Lancer of Red, blocks the attack and protects him. The servants are surprised at Lancer choosing Shiro's side. However, Lancer tells them he's on nobody's side and is only defending his faction. Just then, Shiro breaks their truce and pits the Red faction against the Black. Back on the battlefield, Astolfo's master gets very insulting of Astolfo's identity as a spirit and hero. Astolfo politely deflects her insults and makes her master even more pissed. Knowing how dangerous her master could be when pissed, Astolfo advises Sieg to escape while he still could. Her master immobilizes Sieg and uses her command spell to force Astolfo into taking out her sword and slashing Sieg with it. Astolfo tries her very best to ease her master's frustrations, but nothing seems to be working. Just as she's about to lose hope, Mordred arrives in the nick of time and beheads Astolfo's master. When she's done, she leaves to meet her master, Necromancer. With no master left on Earth, Astolfo's essence begins to fade into the other world. To keep her alive in this world, Sieg forms a contract with Astolfo and becomes her new master with his command spell. Once he's done with the contract, Sieg takes his leave. After gathering all the strongest servants in one place, Shiro begins asking servants of the Black faction to join his team. All but one servant, Castor of the Black faction, aka Avispron, joins Shiro's team. Chiron gets annoyed at Avispron for his betrayal and tries to take him out with one of his arrows. However, Semiramis blocks the attack and orders Castor to take out his own comrades. Castor immediately surrounds them with golems, but Mordred quickly breaks the golems down and escapes the floating fortress with the rest of the servants. Castor makes the contract with Shiro to switch sides on the condition that they leave his master Roches out of harm's way. On their way out of the fortress, Jean explains to Chiron that she was summoned to stop Shiro from upsetting the balance of the world by intervening in the fight. Sieg gets back to the castle to save some of his people that were injured during the attack. After doing that, he gets to the homunculus laboratory and negotiates a deal to release the homunculus from their tanks. Gords is totally against releasing the homunculi from their captivity, as he fears the clan would be helpless without them. He keeps trying to talk down on the homunculus beings, but Sieg argues that they can't keep working under the masters and servants like slaves since they're pretty much human just like them. While the argument goes on, Fiore, who was there listening the whole time, receives the news about Castor's betrayal from Chiron. He tells her to keep Roche, his master, very safe, as Castor may try to use him as the core for his noble phantasm. Sadly, Roche was nowhere to be found in the castle, as he was already meeting with his servant Castor near a river to deliver an object to him. A long time ago, a heavily bearded man visits Earth and is appalled by how disgusting the humans treat the Earth and all its entities. He wishes the Creator could come down from heaven and save them while there's still time. Fast forward to the present day, Necromancer and his servant Mordred discuss their next move now that the Red faction is gone. Necromancer notices Mordred's sullen attitude and teases her about saving Sieg and letting them go. Mordred tells him she doesn't really know what came over her at the time. The urge to save them from their lousy master came naturally. Sieg and the other homunculi are seen clearing some of the rubble caused during the attack when Jean the Ruler arrives to scold Sieg for butting into the fight when he should be resting or trying to avoid trouble. Sieg tells her he couldn't sit idly and watch his comrades get destroyed by the masters and servants. Jean sighs and reasons with his logic. Now, she has to consider him as a major participant in the war. After hearing all Darnik did on the floating fortress, Gordes and Fiore are in shock. However, they quickly move past that and ponder on how to stop Castor and whatever attack he's planning. Chiron tells Fiore and Gordes that Castor intends to use his master, Roches, as a core for his noble phantasm golem. Roches cries out and asks his servant, Avispron or Castor, why he would do such a thing to him. Avispron tells him he's always despised humans, and had been seeking a way to rid the world of us and recreate the Garden of Eden. Roches knows his cries of sorrow aren't reaching Avispron anytime soon. He accepts his fate and fuses with the golem to become one with it. Soon, a pseudo-version of the world's very first man, Adam, is formed into the giant golem. With every step he takes, Adam transforms that terrain into Eden. Avispron gets on his golem, and Treks begin their short journey to the Igdmilanai castle. Meanwhile, Astolfo joins her new master, Sieg, on the roof of the castle to discuss a few things about the previous battle. However, their discussion is cut short as Avispron's golem arrives at the castle. It consumes two homunculus beings for a while and waits for the other servants and masters to come face to face. Sieg and Ryder, Astolfo, are the first ones to be on the scene. They stop the golem from moving and question Avispron's intentions. Avispron asks for her understanding, but Ryder is keen on destroying Avispron. Just then, Chiron shoots multiple arrows at Avispron and takes him out. In his last moments on Earth, Avispron gives the golem its last instructions. Then he disappears. So it turns out he still stays behind after Avispron's disappearance. It becomes more violent than before and attacks its enemies. Astolfo gets on her flying mount and tries to attack the monster from the air. However, it deflects her attack and turns to Sieg, her master, instead. Jean arrives just in time to protect Sieg from the monster. All attacks directed towards the primordial golem are ineffective due to their immense power. Even so, it's not completed its transformation yet. Fiore takes a look at the golem's heat map and shares her view with her servant, Archer. To take down its heart, Archer would need a large magic supply. So, he asks Jean to summon another servant so he can carry out his plan. Jean summons Mordred and allows Archer to relay his plan to her. To make his plan a success, Sieg would have to change into the real Siegfried again, so he, Mordred, and the real Siegfried can attack the monster all at once. With that much magic going into a one-time attack, the monster shouldn't have enough power to regenerate in time. Mordred asks Jean to give herself and Sieg commanding spells so they can transform into their battle forms. Jean reluctantly does so, and Sieg transforms back into the real Siegfried. With all pieces on the chessboard present, Archer, Siegfried, and Mordred all display amazing movements, power, and might, which eventually slashes their enemy, the golem, in pieces. Back on the floating fortress, Shiro informs Atlanta and Achilles to brace for heavy impact, as Jean could be following them. Achilles isn't too worried about that. Rather, he asks Shiro one question before accepting him as his master. Firstly, he asks about their former masters. Shiro tells him they're all in a room in the fortress after they used the poison on them. Achilles is shocked to hear this happen, and he confronts them about their evil deed. However, Shiro feels no remorse as he knows the master would have done the same to him just to get their hands on the Greater Grail. Atlanta quickly folds under Shiro's leadership. Achilles then asks one final question. Is Shiro going to dispose of them as well? Shiro assures him that he cares for them very well. He then asks Achilles and Atlanta about their wishes from the Grail. Achilles tells him he just wants to live as a hero. Meanwhile, Atlanta tells him she wants all children to be loved. Semiramis, the assassin of Red, makes a joke of her a little bit, but Shiro stops her from doing so. When it comes to Lancer, aka Karna, he tells them he just wants a rematch with Saber of the Black Siegfried. Shiro can manage this, so he agrees with their terms and welcomes them on board. One final question now is, how does he intend to save mankind? Shiro gets ready for a lengthy explanation. Elsewhere, the remaining members of the Igdmalenia royal clan host a meeting to talk about their next move. Gordes laughs at Shiro's plan to save the world and calls it unrealistic. However, the acting leader of the clan, Fiore, knows Shiro has the magical ability to do it, especially now that he has the Holy Grail. Necromancer and Mordred switch sides to the Black faction, so he advises them to take the fight to the floating fortress before it's too late. However, they're running low on servants and would need more people to step up. Necromancer and his servant offer their help and Fiore accepts it. After the meeting, Chiron wheels his master, Fiore, to her room. He senses something wrong with her but keeps his mouth shut. Up next, he meets with Fiore's brother, Calls, and discusses Fiore's state of mind with him. He doesn't think she's fit enough to be a master, much less ruler of the entire clan. Qualis tells him a story of his younger days with Fiore. Apparently, Fiore wasn't that afraid of many things, but she had a weak spot for pets and people who die. As a result, Calls knows she can't bear to see her loved ones die. Knowing her weakness, Calls promises to speak to his sister and find out whether or not she still wishes to be the ruler of Ig Millennia. Chiron appreciates the help and leaves. That night, Jean transfers command spells to the servants available. She gives Mordred just one spell and gives her special person, Sieg, 2 command spells. She warns him not to use the last one of the spells as it could trigger a reaction that could end him. Sieg tries to argue her point, but Jean tells him he doesn't have a choice but to listen to her. That night, Necromancer gets a little emotional with his servant and tells her about his life. Apparently, he's the last one of the Sisigo family. When he tried to transfer his family crest to an adopted child, the child died. Ever since then, Necromancer has been really silent about transferring crests and whatnot. He's accepted his fate. Mordred still tries to ask about the Holy Grail. She wonders why they can't be free with their new allies. Necromancer explains to her that they have to keep calm and show their allies no weakness so they can steal the Grail for themselves when the time is right. Mordred appreciates her master's thinking and agrees with him. At the Ig Millennia Castle, Jean stares at her reflection in the mirror as she ponders about Sieg's health in the long run. Gordes stumbles upon a small healing unit in one of the corridors of the castle. There he finds Sieg and his servant Astolfo trying to treat some homunculus beings. This time, Gordes has compassion for once and volunteers to treat the wounded. Sieg asks the reason for his sudden kindness, and he tells Sieg he just wishes to right the wrong he's done to his real servant, Siegfried. One of the homunculus stands up and tells it right to his face. Gordes is an impulsive, self-centered, haughty, and short-tempered human. Gordes accepts his flaws for once and continues treating the homunculi. On the floating fortress, Castor of the Red Faction joins his other servants on the balcony to enjoy the breeze. Achilles asks him if he knew about Shiro's plan all along. Castor tells him that he did, and would always choose to follow it to save mankind. Inside the fortress, Shiro reaffirms his conviction to save the world. So it's that time of the year again when Jack the Ripper goes out to hunt for hearts. This time, Jack interrogates a mage into divulging some information. She promises not to kill him if he spills the beans. The mage tells her all she wishes to hear and gets his heart ripped out afterwards. Jean and her host, Letitia, have a discussion about her most recent vision. Apparently, Jean saw a vision of her comrades betraying and killing her in the nearest future. Letitia asks her what she feels about that. Jean tells her she holds no grudge against them and just wishes the war would end. Letitia asks her about Shiro, and Jean says she's yet to decide what to think of him. The following day, Jean runs into Sieg in one of the corridors in the castle. Sieg was on his way to deliver supplies to the small nursing home. She offers to help him, but Sieg tells her not to worry too much about him. Sieg walks for a few more meters before collapsing. Jean carries him to a bed and waits for him to wake up. Sieg wakes up to see Chiron, his servant, and a few others there waiting for him. After analyzing the nature of the illness, Chiron concludes that Sieg may be slowly turning back to the real Siegfried in due time. This is because of the frequent transformations he's been undergoing these past few days. Sieg has the choice to either stay in this form or accept his fate and turn into Siegfried. Sieg ponders on what to do, and the others leave him. When he's alone, Sieg thinks long and hard about what to do. Eventually, he decides to stay true to who he is till the end. In their next meeting, the remnants of the clan find out about Jack the Ripper's rampage in the entire city. Fiore asks Jean to help them bring the Ripper down. Everyone gets on board with the plan, and Chiron asks Fiore for an apt description of the assassin. Astolfo tells them they have to tread carefully, as they know very little information about Jack the Ripper. Nonetheless, they all have to be ready to fight when the time comes. After their meeting, the servants head into Tryphus to investigate the killings. They find about 8 new murders that day with their hearts torn out of their chests. They play and talk around a bit to figure out the assassin's endgame. Calls decides to go into one of the dead mage's memories to simulate the kind of pain he passed through before he died. Mere minutes after entering into the state, he screams out loud as the pain the mages felt is immeasurable. While in his trance, he kept on muttering the phrase, "I know them all." Chiron brings him back to life and interprets what those words meant. When it clicks, his eyes open out wide and they realize that the assassin's next target was the castle. Calls his sister and tells her to escape the castle while she still can. Unfortunately, it was already too late as a familiar poisonous mist was already around the castle. Archer immediately races towards the castle as the signal from Call's cell phone cuts off. The others join Archer and race towards the castle. In the meantime, Sieg takes in all the homunculus outside the castle. He suddenly remembers that Fiore is unguarded, so he rushes to her room to find her. Fiore, on the other hand, wheels herself through the mist with her handkerchief in her mouth. hoping the assassin won't find her. Sadly, Jack already tracked her down and cornered her. She takes some of her things and makes fun of Fiore's disability. Fiore calls her Dr. Octavius's spider legs and uses them to carry herself outside. Jack catches up to her and prepares to strike. As she's about to slash Fiore to extinction, Sieg arrives and wounds her. Jack gets annoyed and begins a heated fight with Sieg. Chiron joins the fight as well and Jack retreats. Soon everyone is back in the castle. Fiore tells her subordinates that they must destroy the Ripper or else the damage would keep increasing. The following day, Jean joins Sieg to go on a search for Jack the Ripper and Tryphus. Sieg appears to be very fatigued, but Jean tells him to put on a good face as they'll be the decoy to lure Jack into fighting them. On their way to Tryphus, Sieg gets worried about Letitia, the ruler's host. Jean tells him that her host is just fine as long as she conceals her magic powers. She shouldn't appear as suspicious to the people. As they continue their trip to Tryphus, the duo discuss the findings of their investigation. In the Yggd Millennia town, Jack the Ripper's master plays the piano for her. She listens to her play the piano with grace and gets very flustered when her mother praises her. On getting to town, Sieg and Jean visit a shop to get some souvenirs for their peers back at the castle. Sieg, however, feels nervous and isn't sure of what to do to have fun. Jean understands his predicament and decides to teach him how to behave in public. She takes him to the market in town and also gets him to meet some people and relate with them. At one point in their vacation, Sieg and Jean attend a wedding. In the evening, Jean takes a walk with Sieg and commends his maturity. She asks him if he joined them just to get revenge on the assassin. Sieg tells her he just wishes to avenge his brothers and sisters, as the assassin had killed many of them already. Jean tells him a bit about her past life, especially about the part where she was burned at the stake after risking her life for the same people who wanted her burnt. Sieg offers her some words of comfort and makes her blush. Jean chickens out of the blush and looks the other way. In the next scene, Shiro meets with Achilles on the floating fortress to ask after Atalanta, who seemed to have left the fortress in a hurry. Achilles tells him that he sent her to Tryphus to watch over the town for the assassin. Before Shiro goes, Achilles asks him some questions. He asks Shiro the reason why he chooses to save mankind instead of destroying them. They've never been good to him anyways. Shiro tells his servant that he threw away his hatred for the human after seeing how broken the system is. He plans to do something about it very soon, and would love it if Achilles would truly be on board. Achilles sees the conviction in his master's eyes, and leaves that spot. On his way back inside, he finds Semiramis, and gets under his skin just a little bit before going his own way. Sieg and Jean sit down to have some tea in an outdoor cafe. Sieg asks her about her thoughts about Shiro. Jean tells him she's still inconclusive about whether Shiro's plan is good enough or not. For all she knows, he could be doing the right thing, and her trying to stop may be arrogant of her. Nonetheless, Sieg still thanks her for coming through for him even when she didn't need to do such. By nightfall, Astolfo scouts the streets of Tryphus on her flying mount. Suddenly, the all-too-familiar poison mist covers Tryphus. The hour is nigh as the assassin, Jack the Ripper, is about to strike again. Jean transforms into her normal form, and Sieg rushes around the streets to search for anybody left outside. He finds a woman pretending to be hurt by the mist and gets too close. The woman reveals herself and points a gun at Sieg's heart. She pulls the trigger 3 times and shoots his heart. However, Sieg didn't die. Instead, he removes the bullet and chases after Jack the Ripper's master. The master summons Jack the Ripper as quickly as possible, and she appears on the scene. Jack attacks Jean first with a fatal slash to the belly. However, Jean's body negates the curse and she counters her attack. Jack the Ripper throws a knocked-out human at Jean to distract her. This works, but Ripper couldn't land a good enough attack on Jean as she gets hit by Archer's arrow. Almost immediately, her master summons her side and carries her away. Apparently, Jack just lost her leg and couldn't walk. Her master carries her on her back and walks back home. She stops suddenly and waits for something to happen. Just then, Atlanta's arrow hits her chest and she collapses. Atlanta draws nearer and shoots another arrow at Jack to take her out. Thinking both were already gone, Atlanta gets closer to the bodies. Just then, Jack wakes up and transforms into a zombie. She increases the mist around them and gets even stronger. Atlanta steps back from the zombie form of Jack the Ripper. However, she gets engulfed in a denser mist of poison fumes. Atlanta enters a trance and has children surrounding her, asking her why she would eliminate Jack's mother and master. Atlanta begs them to leave her and then sees a former version of herself back when she was still with the gods. In her vision, Atlanta finds herself making one of her sister's hair. She tells the sister her origin story of how the goddess Artemis found her abandoned in the woods as a baby. Apparently her father never wanted her because she was a girl. Just then, she gets out of the vision and into the trance again. This time hundreds of children gather around her and engulf her. Elsewhere, Sieg also gets into his own trance. Only this time he sees different forms of horrible things happening to poor kids all around him. Jack appears to him and tells him he's in the world where both born and unborn children are killed and fed to the River Thames. Sieg breaks down and despairs over how his world is. Astolfo runs through the mist searching for her master. She calls out his name a few times but gets no response. Chiron tells her he can't sense them in their plane, but Astolfo keeps searching for her master. Jean, on the other hand, also gets pulled into the nightmarish trance of the assassin. She recognizes something different about this world she's in and protects herself with her magic. Sieg sits on an outdoor bench in despair until someone, Jack's master, appears to him. She tells him about the horrible conditions of the world we live in. Sieg falls into even more despair when he realizes that the world can't be saved. He tries asking her for a way out, but Jack's master falls back to her death. Sieg gets into the trance again and finds Jack the Ripper staring at him alongside several other children. She asks Sieg about her mother, but Sieg is too scared to say anything. Jean catches up to Jack in her own trance. Jack is surprised to find out that Jean is not scared of her at all. She asks her why, and Jean says they're the victims and are to be pitied, not feared. Jack tries to get more sympathy from Jean by conjuring more children to beg her for forgiveness. However, Jean does the hardest thing possible. She makes the children know that she has to destroy them now that their souls have been tainted by darkness. The children recoil in fear of what she's about to do. Jean nearly finishes her mission if not for Atlanta, who arrives and stops her from killing the children. Due to her own origins, she would rather die than see someone take any kid's life. Jean tries to reason with her, telling her freeing their souls is the only way to salvation. Atlanta, however, wasn't having any of that. She tries talking down on Jean, claiming that she's never truly felt the impact of war on the lives of the affected. Jean shocks her and says she participated in every Holy Grail war that had ever happened and isn't sorry for the outcome. Atlanta tears up and begs Jean to let the children go. One of the kids walks up to Jean and asks her if killing them would truly free their souls. Jean assures her that it would. Just then, she does the deed, and the souls of the children finally rest in peace. In her final moments, Jack accepts her fate and her punishment for killing people. She says her final goodbyes and heads back to heaven. Once the deed is done, Atlanta gets up and fires arrows at Jean for what she did to the kids. Jean defects some of the arrows and prepares to face Atlanta. Astolfo and Chiron arrive soon enough and outnumber Atlanta. Atlanta retreats back to the floating fortress. Astolfo follows her and tracks her down. Meanwhile, Jean gets to Sieg and explains the horrible nature of humans to him. She begs Sieg to keep his heart warm towards people, despite how different and cold they can be to him at times. Sieg smiles and gets back up. He promises to stay focused on his heart. Chiron arrives and reports that Atlanta eventually escaped Astolfo. He excuses himself and gets back to his master, Fiore. Sieg asks Jean why Atlanta said she wouldn't forgive her for anything. Jean tells him that Atlanta probably hates her and thinks she's evil. Well, that's not the main issue at the moment, as she asks Sieg to follow her back to the castle. Sieg thinks a little bit about what he's to do now that he's seen the other cold, rather cruel side of the world. He joins Jean shortly and follows her to the castle. Fiore hosts a meeting with her subordinates to discuss their next move. They all decide they have to infiltrate the floating fortress and retrieve the Holy Grail before it flies past their country of Romania. The only issue they have now is getting past the fortress's defenses. Astolfo tells her they could use her noble phantasm to disable the magic barriers around the fortress. To activate, however, she would need a moonless night, such as the night of a new moon. Since that's 3 days away, Fiore and the others set the battle to happen in that time period. That night, Cole speaks with his sister concerning her capacity to shoulder the entire war and clan. He feels she doesn't have what it takes to be a mage when the time comes. Aside from being disabled, Fiore can't stand to see people die in front of her. Calls calmly tells her to give him the family crest so he can shoulder the responsibility on his own. Fiore cries at her powerlessness, but Calls assures her that she's fine just the way she is. Jean meets with Sieg one last time before sleeping to talk to him about the war. She finds Astolfo walking out of his bathroom naked and screams out loud. The next day, Astolfo and Sieg step into Trefis to get some air. Astolfo falls in love with a good-looking pie at a restaurant and asks her master to get it for her. She pulls Sieg into the shop and finds Mordred there already munching on some medium-rare steak with eggs. Elsewhere, Calls and Fiore prepare the crest transmission ritual. Chiron puts them to sleep and begins the ritual. In the first half, Calls' body rejects the ritual, and this causes him to react violently to the spell. This reaction causes him to get into a trance. In his trance, he finds his sister holding her childhood dog and collects it from her. Fiore willingly gives him her dog. Just then, Calls wakes up and gets back to normal. Fiore expresses her pride for her brother as he gets back on his feet. Astolfo and Sieg sit and watch Mordred eat her meal. When she's done, Sieg asks her a blunt question. He asks Mordred about her thoughts on people in general. Mordred tells him all the bad things about humans and asks him what he thinks about humans. Sieg tells her he used to think of them as kind and wise until his experience with Jack the Ripper. Mordred tells him that she doesn't give too much thought to humans. Rather, she plans on getting her hands on the Grail and becoming the next king of England. Once she's done with her speech, she leaves. Sieg and Astolfo walk back to the castle. On their way home, they meet Jean, who tags along. With Sieg walking in front, Jean asks Astolfo some personal questions about Sieg. Astolfo figures out that the ruler might have a crush on Sieg. Instead of embarrassing her, Astolfo becomes the best wingman and asks Sieg to check up on his precious Jean. After finding out Jean is good, Sieg calls himself a failure for failing to protect the children during his fight with Jack the Ripper. Jean tells him not to worry too much about such a thing, and that he's the best master Astolfo could ever wish for. Later that night, Calls wheels his sister to her room. While at it, he tells her to keep the castle warm for him while he fights with the others in the final war in the floating fortress. Fiore tells him she's going to fight alongside and there's nothing he can do about it. Calls smiles and welcomes his sister aboard. A few minutes later, Fiore meets Chiron, the Archer of Black, on a balcony to talk to him one last time before the war. Chiron gets on his knees and thanks his master for being the best master to him ever. Fiore is flustered and accepts his praises. Meanwhile, Calls crashes on his bed and thinks about the troubles ahead. Just when he's about to despair, one of Berserker's flowers lands on his hands. Jean, on the other hand, keeps wondering why she's so worried about Sieg's involvement in the war. It's almost like she desperately doesn't want him to join the war and risk dying. In the following scene, Necromancer and Mordred prepare their plane for the attack on the fortress. Necromancer gets worried about her father, Arthur, and how she will overtake his kingship from him. Necromancer gives her some advice on how to do so, and urges her to get ready for the big fight coming up. Mordred woman up and thanks him for nudging her in the right direction. Back on the floating fortress, Atlanta meets Achilles and asks him if he thinks the children can be saved. Achilles tells her he doesn't think so, and she leaves shortly. Dawn approaches the land in the next few minutes, and everyone on the floating fortress stares at the sun, as if they were expecting something out of the ordinary to happen. Very early that morning, Gordes and a few of the homunculus people in the castle escort Fiore, Sieg, Caul, Jean, and Astolfo out of the castle and wish them good luck on their travels. Meanwhile, Shiro takes one last look at the sun before he begins his plan to save mankind. By nightfall, Fiore, Calls, and the others join up with Necromancer and Mordred at the airport. They go over the plan one last time before they board the planes that'll take them to the floating fortress. Sieg is to stay with his servant at all times and make sure he never leaves her side. As for the others, they're to split up and work in teams to take down the fortress. After going over the plan, Fiore grants her servant, Chiron, freedom to use his noble phantasm as he pleases. Chiron accepts the kind gift and thanks his master for her kindness before leaving. Also, Jean talks with Sieg one last time and warns him not to put himself in harm's way at all. She moves on to Astolfo and urges her to protect her master with her life. Astolfo nods in agreement and calls on her flying mount. When it comes, she and Sieg get on the giant eagle and begin their ascent to the floating garden. Before going into the Holy Grail, Shiro calls on his caster servant and uses a command spell to ensure he doesn't write a tragedy about this battle. Caster tells Shiro that such a request may be impossible for him. Shiro tightens the spell and makes sure he succumbs to the request. Just then, Semiramis arrives and helps Shiro get closer to the Holy Grail. On getting to the Grail, Shiro forces a way into the Grail, opens it up, and walks inside it, leaving Assassin and Caster alone in the room. Assassin captures Caster and asks him what his plans for the Grail are. However, Caster replies to her question with another question. He asks her why she's so quick to help Shiro. Assassin, without realizing it, indirectly tells Caster how much she adores Shiro and his way of life. She wishes to see the things he sees and do the things he does. Caster calls her out on her feelings and gets her more annoyed. Before she could harm him in any way, the Black Faction people arrive. The assassin leaves the caster and rallies the other servants to formulate a battle plan to take down their oncoming enemies. She sees they're fast approaching and is leaving her no choice. So she quickly dishes out objectives for her servants and urges them to get to their battle stations ASAP. Atlanta asks the assassin to leave Jean to her. She has a grudge against the so-called ruler and would want to have a chance with her. Outside the fortress, Jean and the others approach standing on magic-powered and controlled planes. Jean calls for Shiro, but the assassin Semiramis answers her and shuts her up. Just then, the servants of the Red Faction all pull up for the fight and attack the Black Faction members. Achilles has fun fighting Chiron while Atlanta faces Jean. She gets emotional with Jean and fights her with all her might. Jean stays calm amidst all and analyzes her opponent. In the meantime, Chiron traps Achilles and pulls him off his flying horse, Pegasus. Achilles gets on Chiron's plane and has the normal anime talk with him before their big fight. You know, the one about morals and not wanting to do what people tell him to do. Chiron asks Achilles about his master's plan to save humanity. Achilles tells him his master plans to use the third magic, Heaven's Feel, to materialize all human souls and bring the dead back to life. This way, there wouldn't be a need for war and the Earth would be saved one more time. Chiron asks him why he supports such a movement. Achilles tells him he's just tired of losing too many friends and family to war and strife. He just wants the fighting to stop. Chiron concurs with his student, Achilles' thoughts, and continues the fight. Not so far away, Astolfo and her master Sieg prepare themselves to activate Astolfo's noble phantasm. When the moon is new and the time is right, Astolfo brings out her grimoire and casts a magic negation spell to block all of Semiramis' attacks. Semiramis finds out Astolfo's spell may be more powerful than hers, so she increases the intensity of her attack. Nonetheless, Astolfo still blocks her attack. She then goes on to destroy 1 out of the 10 defense points of the fortress. Semiramis gets upset and asks Lancer, aka Karna, to stop Astolfo and her master. Karna approaches them and chases them all around the fortress to stop them. However, Astolfo and her master dodge all his attacks. At that moment, Saber of Red, Mordred, and her master Necromancer arrive at the battle space. They cook up their plan and dive right into battle. Astolfo keeps borrowing magic from her master as she blocks all of Lancer's heavy attacks. When Lancer's attacks become more than annoying, Sieg decides to fight him head-on to buy his servant some time to destroy the rest of the fortress's defenses. So, Sieg gets down to the fortress and challenges Lancer to a fight. After transforming into the real Saber, Lancer abandons his mission and agrees to fight him. Astolfo continues destroying each and every one of the fortress's defenses. Semiramis tries to stop her by sending beams of purple magic destruction rays. Astolfo dodges those attacks the best way she can. With only 2 defense points remaining, she gets hit by the ray. Still, Astolfo refuses to give up. She makes sure to destroy all the fortress's defenses before crash landing on the fortress. Semiramis appears to finish her off, but Mordred arrives just in time to stop her from doing so. At that moment, Achilles decides to show Chiron his noble phantasm. He thrusts his spear into the plane and overrides the world. Suddenly, the dark night turns bright and the duo are in another dimension. Achilles walks towards Chiron and challenges him to a duel. The winner gets to go home with his life while the loser dies. Chiron accepts the challenge and tells Achilles a few things before beginning their fight. The 2 men bump fists and begin their fight fair and square. In the first half of the fight, Achilles overpowers Chiron and kicks his eye. However, Chiron counters his attacks and attacks Achilles' heel. The fight continues with both warriors giving it their all. Chiron directs a series of accelerated punches at his former student. Achilles blocks and waits for his chance. When it comes, he directs a super punch into Achilles' stomach and takes him out. In his final moments, Chiron thanks Achilles for allowing him to die an honorable death. Achilles, thinking he's won, lets his guard down. Just then, Chiron asks him to lend them his noble phantasm and fight for their cause. Achilles humbly tells him he'll consider it. As a final gift to Achilles before leaving, Chiron points his finger up in the sky and uses the Sagaratus star to conjure up an arrow that shoots Achilles in his left heel. This attack takes Achilles' immortality and makes him vulnerable to attacks. Achilles leaves the plane he's on and allows it to crash to the ground with Chiron on it. Achilles lands safely on another functional plane and hears Atlanta's voice as she fights Jean. After rendering all her attacks useless, Atlanta decides to go for the last trick in her book. She takes out her sword and uses her noble phantasm, Agrius Metamorphosis. This transforms her into a purple monster 10 times stronger than her normal self. Jean finally has to take her fight with Atlanta seriously now. Jean tries to stop Atlanta from throwing away her humanity just to bring her down. However, Atlanta tells her it's the only way she can avenge the kids. She has to destroy their killer, Jean. In the meantime, Sieg bleeds profusely after his stressful fight with Lancer. While he recovers, Lancer calls him and Calls, who was hiding all along, to ask for their help before they continue fighting. This time, he asks them to help free their original masters from Shiro's grasp. Calls agree to this and sneak into the upper chambers to free their masters. When he's done, Lancer gets ready for round 2. Before the fight begins, Sieg asks him to spare Jean after their fight. Lancer, however, makes him know that he doesn't have any intentions of sparing anybody. All is fair in love and war. He asks Sieg to call out the real Siegfried again so they can finally finish their battle once and for all. Sieg responds to his call and summons his inner self. The fight between Jean and Atlanta continues with Atlanta beating the living hell out of Jean. Turns out Jean was still holding back as she feels guilty for what she did to the kids. Atlanta asks her to apologize for what she did to those kids. Jean tells her she feels no regret for doing what she did. The children's spirits were already tainted, and they all needed saving. While her body degrades, she inches towards Jean to use her attack, Tauropolis, in hopes of dealing considerable damage to Jean. Her plan almost works as she manages to corner Jean. Just as she's about to end Jean, Achilles arrives and takes over from there. He tells Jean to leave and find another person to fight while he takes care of Atlanta. Jean seized this opportunity and escaped Atlanta's grasp. Achilles summons his spear and gets ready to fight his sister again. Jean finds Semiramis in her chamber waiting for her. She asks the Assassin of Red about her thoughts on her master's plan to save mankind. Semiramis tells her that she believes all her master is trying to do and would stop anybody trying to hinder his plans. Jean knows words won't do any good, so she prepares to fight her next opponent. In the meantime, Sieg and his opponent Lancer unleash every attack in their arsenal and fight to their heart's content. For once, Lancer lets go of his restrictions and utilizes his lance to its full capability. Siegfried also does the same as he transforms into the feared Saber of Black and counters all of Lancer's attacks. After a long-ass battle scene, Lancer decides to end it all in one strike. He activates the most powerful attack he knows and dedicates it to the strongest warrior he's ever faced, Siegfried. Siegfried also unleashes his own attack and sends his own beam of blue lightning towards Lancer's attack. Lancer's attack seemed to overpower Siegfried's attack and would have destroyed him if not for Astolfo, who arrived at the right time. She uses Achilles' shield and his noble phantasm to absorb all of Lancer's attacks. Karna's eyes open wide as he stares in disbelief. This leaves him open to any attacks from his opponent. Siegfried seizes his chance and rushes in for the final attack. This time, he manages to land a fatal thrust into Lancer's heart. Lancer thanks Siegfried for making his end swift and interesting for him. Before he leaves, he apologizes to Sing for threatening to kill the ruler. He also tells Sieg to hurry up and meet up with Ruler as she would be fighting their caster next. Sieg rushes into the fortress to search for his beloved. Astolfo pays her respects to the fallen hero, Lancer, and appreciates him for being true to himself till the end. Achilles keeps up with Atlanta's attacks, dodging them anytime he could. When he finds his chance, he punctures her stomach and immobilizes her. Atlanta transforms back to her normal self and accepts her mistakes. She appreciates Achilles for being there for her, even when she went astray. She disappears into thin air shortly and dies. Achilles also joins her as he dies from a fatal wound. Inside the floating fortress, Necromancer and his servant Mordred keep searching for an enemy to fight. On their way to their next fight, the two laugh and joke around about their goals. Mordred gets serious and asks her master what he thinks would happen after she's named king. Necromancer tells her not to worry, and that the thought would naturally come to her. After walking for a bit, Mordred and her master run into the assassin of the Red faction, Semiramis. After exchanging insulting words towards one another, Assassin draws first blood. She unleashes a poisonous mist and covers the room all around her. Mordred quickly kicks her master out of the room, locks it, and remains there to fight Assassin. Mordred gets affected by the mist, but she manages to stand up on her feet. The Necromancer tries to summon Mordred back outside the room. However, his command spells don't work as the assassin had already placed barriers inside that room. Mordred charges at the assassin Semiramis but doesn't even get a chance to land a hit on her. She gets desperate and risks her own life to get to the assassin. Still, it was not enough as Assassin kept on blocking her attacks. Mordred unleashes the strongest attack in her arsenal, Blood Arthur, and directs it at the assassin. Assassin, however, activates her noble phantasm in the nick of time and turns her surroundings to poison. Mordred's body begins to break down due to the poison effects and she sits on her knees immobile. Assassin gets close to her and asks her to abandon her master, Necromancer. Mordred recalls her younger days when she was about to pull out the king's sword. At that point, Arthur Pendragon, who was there with her, warns her about the dangers of pulling out such a sword. She risks abandoning her entire life and all she loved by pulling that sword. Young Mordred gives the matter a little more thought. While thinking, an older version of her arrives and pulls out the sword. Just then, Mordred summons the courage to stand back up and fight. Necromancer joins in the fight and fends the assassin away from his servant. Then, he injects some substance into her neck which increases her power tenfold. Mordred becomes much stronger than ever. She charges towards her enemy with only one thing on her mind: kill! Assassin summons her big spider thing to take Mordred down. However, Necromancer uses a command spell and orders his servant to bring down the assassin of the Red faction. Mordred responds to her master's spell and not only takes down Semiramis' spider thingy, but she also makes sure to destroy Semiramis' spiritual core. After everything, Mordred sits near her wounded boss. The wound on Necromancer seems to be fatal, so he just lays there and waits for his clock to run out. He thanks his servant for helping him get this far, and asks her to form an alliance with one of the Yggd Millennia people so she can stay on Earth. However, Mordred wishes to be with her master till the end. She even takes up one of his smokes to try out for the first time. She coughs violently as with every first-timer smoker. Necromancer asks his servant if she really had fun in her last fight. Mordred tells her she really did. Necromancer dies shortly and Mordred disappears into thin air. Elsewhere, Jean finally meets with her next opponent, the caster of the Red faction. Caster uses his art magic to send her into a trance, just like he did Berserker. Only this time, Jean appears to be back in her own hometown. Sieg and his master get trapped on their way towards Ruler's location. Sieg gets off Astolfo's hippogriff and continues the rest of his journey on land. Castor directs Jean's story and keeps taking her through the different painful paths she's passed through in her lifetime. Firstly, he takes her to her hometown and puts the death of her people as her responsibility. Next up, he takes her to the battlefield and reminds her of the horrific battle she fought for her people. Jean overcomes the second scene. The third stage features Jean having to witness Sieg burnt at the stake by her people. This time, Jean breaks and begs Castor to let Sieg go. However, Castor tells her he's only replaying her own memories. Her seeing Sieg being burnt at the stake must mean she thinks she killed him. The Castor brings her back to the fortress, summons a servant, Marshal Gilles, and presents him to Jean as real. The servant introduces himself to Jean and shocks her. Jean tries to talk to Marshal. However, Marshal replies to her by showing Sieg's head. Marshal asks her why she's showing exceptional love to such a youthful individual. Jean, as the ruler, is supposed to show equal love to all of mankind and not show anybody any special treatment. Jean tries to talk her way out of it, but Marshal breaks her and blames her for Sieg's imminent death. Inside the Holy Grail, Shiro stands over a war-ridden battlefield. He thinks about the consequences of war, and decides he has to forgive mankind's transgressions and all that have done him wrong if he's to save all of humanity. He appears in the Grail's core being and tells her his wish. Shiro wants to save mankind by materializing their souls and making them all immortal. Jean revels in despair as she can't figure out who she is anymore. Castor and Marshal make jest of her naivete and welcome their master, Shiro, back from the Holy Grail as the hour cometh night. Shiro returns to the normal world and assures his servant that he has changed the fate of mankind. He tells Jean that the third magic has been completed. Very soon, humans would return to their initial form the Creator made them. Before Jean could say anything, Marshal walks over to her and tells her to accept the death of the homunculus Sieg. However, Jean tells him she still believes in Sieg, and the fact that he won't die that easily. Castor is surprised Jean still has her mind intact and commends her for being that strong. At that moment, Sieg arrives at the room of the Holy Grail and rushes towards his beloved. Jean looks at his arm and realizes that he's used up all his command spells, despite her telling him not to use them all. Sieg tells her that he had to use it to take down Lancer. Jean gets sad and apologizes for bringing him along with her to fight the war. Jean steps forward to challenge Shiro and possibly stop his plan. Marshal tries to talk her into allowing Shiro's plan to move forward. However, Sieg explains to them, giving them reasons the current state of humanity is the best state they all could possibly wish for. Although most humans may be bad, the majority of humans still strive to be good in the end. Jean sobs and tells Marshal that she can't accept Shiro's salvation. When asked why, she tells him it's because he doesn't have any hope in the salvation of humans. Marshal breaks down and starts crying as he thought Shiro's way would offer him restitution to the children he's murdered in the past. Jean comforts her servant and assures him that things would be fine very, very soon. Shiro gets emotional and tells her he spent the last 60 years of his life planning that moment. He's not going to allow some pent-up ruler spirit to change things for him. He draws some power from the Holy Grail and prepares to fight anybody who opposes him. Jean gives Marshal her flag and thanks him for being there for her. Marshal humbly accepts the flag. Jean turns to Sieg and thanks him for being a loving person to her while it lasted. Sieg nods in agreement and waits for something to happen. Jean takes out her holy sword, holds the sharp side, and uses her blood to activate her noble phantasm. Shiro tries to attack Jean while she's still preparing for her fight. However, Marshal steps in and takes in the attack. When she's done, Jean says her final goodbyes to her lover, Sieg, and then transforms into her warrior state. Shiro activates his two noble phantasms and directs heavy attacks towards Jean. He uses the power of the Grail to create an intense inferno that blows the entire room up. After the heavy attack, Jean loses her life to the injury. Sieg holds her in his arms and watches the person he loves the most fade into nothingness. Now, all that's left is the alive body of the host, Letitia. The ruler is gone. Ryder arrives at that moment to help Sieg. Assassin also arrives at that moment and captures Ryder and her flying mount. Sieg places Letitia's unconscious body and calls his care, and draws out his sword to face Shiro. Shiro also draws out his own sword and begins the final fight with Sieg. Surprisingly, Sieg shocks everybody by fighting with Shiro as his equal. He keeps up with all of Shiro's attacks and fights almost like a certain fallen servant. While everyone wonders how Sieg is keeping up, Calais sees a familiar leaf from his Berserker's Blasted Tree Mega attack. He immediately knows it's Berserker using Sieg's body. He shouts out loud and urges his servant to keep up the fight with Shiro. After exchanging a few slashes, Shiro stabs Sieg in the upper arm region. Sieg holds him close to him and uses a Berserker Blasted Tree attack to destroy his opponent, Shiro. The damage from the Blasted Tree attack affects the structure of the floating fortress, so it begins to crumble away little by little. Shiro wakes up in Semiramis' arms in a beautiful outdoor spot on the fortress. Semiramis had already numbed his pain so he could die in peace. In his final moments, Shiro apologizes to Semiramis for tricking her into helping him. Rather than get angry, Semiramis treats her dying master with love and affection as she asks him if he had planned to kill her all along. Shiro tells her he would do no such thing. He only wanted to achieve his aim and nothing more. Semiramis sobs softly and plants a soft kiss on Shiro's lips. Shiro opens his eyes wide in surprise and thanks Semiramis for giving him a painless death. Just then, he draws his last breath and passes on. Shortly afterwards, Semiramis disappears into thin air and returns to the underworld. At that point, Sieg is seen inside the Holy Grail waiting for the being to grant his mission. Astolfo follows him into the Grail and gets relieved after finding out Sieg is fine. The imitation of the individual, Eustace, appears to ask for Sieg's wish. Sieg tells her he wishes to stop Shiro's wish on mankind. However, Eustace tells him she can't stop that from happening. The fate of mankind is currently undergoing an overhaul and there's nothing she can do about it. Sieg asks her whether or not it's too early for such a thing to happen to mankind. She tells him that it's not her place to say. However, as long as the Grail is in this world, people would be able to live forever. Sieg thinks of his wish very well and finally decides on his wish. He asks the being to turn him into the dragon Fafnir, so he can carry the Holy Grail to the reverse side of the world. Ryder begs her master not to do something like that. However, Sieg's already made up his mind. He asks Ryder to keep living with his memories on Earth. Ryder has no choice but to accept her master's wishes. She happily walks back and allows her master to get turned into a dragon. Ryder gets back outside the fortress, picks Calls and Letitia up, and finds a way out of the fortress before it collapses. The caster, who's busy writing the tales of the events that happened in the fortress, opens his eyes wide as he sees Ryder take the others out of the fortress to safety. He accepts his fate and lets himself be crushed in the fortress. Just right outside the fortress, Ryder sees her master in his new form, a dragon, and watches him carry the Holy Grail to the reverse side of the world. Now humans can remain mortal, and the world will remain the same. Letitia suddenly remembers Sieg's time with Jean and hopes they can see each other again. A few weeks after the fight, the world returns to its normal state. Calls is interviewed by one of the association's top mages. Although he's called a failure for losing 3 out of their masters, the mage still appreciates his work for them. After their meeting, the mage takes some time alone to think about the life of the legend himself, Shiro. Elsewhere, Letitia meets up with Astolfo and tells her about all the things she saw and did in the war. She tells her she remembers it all and is thankful to see such a thing in real life. Astolfo also thanks her master for letting her stay in the world with the people and takes a ride with Letitia one last time before she leaves the country for her home country of France. While on the plane back home, Letitia thinks back about the feelings Jean felt for Sieg. She really hopes they can find each other one day again. Astolfo sits on an outdoor bench until she gets bored and calls her flying mount. When it comes, she hops on it and gets on a flight to her next destination to tour the world. The series comes to an end with the Holy Grail War at its end. In the epilogue, it's revealed that Sieg eventually found the spirit of Jeanne d'Arc resting on the moon and waiting for him. He smiles and reunites with his lover as they both get to the afterlife together.